All right, I think we can start so people aren't kept waiting. So this is, I think, the first in a series of show and tells that Coko is doing. Coko, the Collaborative Knowledge Foundation. My name is Jure. I'm the lead developer at Coko. And we have here today Yannis, who will demo Wax, a substance-based browser word processor that they've developed for Editoria, a book production platform. Maybe just a quick intro of who Coko is and what we do. So Coko, as I said, is the Collaborative Knowledge Foundation. We work in basically in processes publishing knowledge, and our current biggest project is PubSuite, which is a framework for building these knowledge production platforms. There are two current implementations of it, and that's Editoria, a book production platform, and Xpub, a journal production platform. So with that, I would like to give my word to Yannis and have him take it away. Go, Yannis.
Okay. Let me screen share. So I guess you're now saying you're, but can you see the editor?
Yep. We can see. Yeah, we can see it. Right. Go for it.
Okay. So as you already said, Wax was originally built for the Editoria project. Coko was commissioned to do the Editoria project for the University of California Press to manage the production of books from the author giving a manuscript all the way to publication. So Wax is a web-based word processor. By web-based, obviously, we mean that it just runs in your browser. And apart from running in the browser, the only other really goal was to use HTML as the underlying data for the editor. So why? Because it's generic for the web, and so that means that the data itself, other systems don't have to have any knowledge of an API to just use them. And it's also quite important that HTML can easily be packaged into an EPUB, and EPUB can be very convenient as a transport mechanism between systems. It's been built with Substance. Most of you know, but I'll say it anyway. Substance is a JavaScript framework. It gives you a variety of tools to build editors, essentially. The reason we chose Substance was, at the time that we started, it was, from what we had seen, by far the most powerful of the editors, and there's been a lot of activity over the last year or so in the editor space and the web. But I think it's like, even though it's still in beta and there's sparse implementation, I think it's still pretty up there. So it provides us with the flexibility to do pretty much whatever we want, functionality-wise, UI-wise. I mean, you can see this UI now, but you're by no ways bound into like always having a toolbar at the top and the text in the middle. So it gives you all this flexibility. It also allows us to use HTML as the underlying data, which is not the case for most of the other editors we've seen. And very important, it's not bound to a specific front-end framework like React or Angular. For example, Draft would be bound to React. And that means that if a specific front-end framework goes out of fashion, then you're not stuck with an editor that you can't really use. So Wax is composed of a few different pieces. The main one is Wax Core, of course. The Wax Core includes the main moving parts of the system. So the writing surface that you do your editing in, what the editing behavior is, how to handle content and configuration that comes from outside its scope, passing the configuration to its children components within it, stuff like that. Now, attached to the core is a number of packages. And these are pretty much components that can add functionality to the editor. And by that, it could be something as simple like extending the editor to have a bold functionality. Or it could be as complex as being able to track changes and override what happens when you use your keyboard. It could also be something unrelated to the annotations. So if you want to have like on the right a div that's a container that just displays some information, that could also be a package. We also built outside of Wax core and the packages, there's also a React integration. So one of the things that were a problem when we first started was it was a bit daunting to even get started with getting a Substance editor up and running. And in hindsight, it seems pretty simple now for us, but at the time it was a time drain. So one of the things that we wanted was to abstract all this functionality into an integration, in this case, a React component, so that you could just throw the component into your existing code, give it some props, and it would just run out of the box. So it also handles some things that are out of scope for Wax core. Like, for example, if I make a change and I try to leave, I should get a warning that I have unsaved changes and I haven't saved them. So this is blocking the router, but Wax core shouldn't really know what environment it exists in. So if you have a React app, then you're probably using React router. So it's the integration's job to stop the router for you. Now we're in the PubSuite ecosystem, which heavily uses React. So that's why we wrote a React integration specifically. But the idea is that as it stands, with a fairly minimal amount of code, you could just write another integration. If you're doing Angular, just write an Angular integration, and you would still be able to use everything that's in the editor quite easily, or just pure JavaScript. It doesn't necessarily have to be a framework. Another part of it is the PubSuite integration. So what you're seeing now is the editor as it exists within Editoria. So we have a PubSuite component that is a full page editor, and it handles some stuff that are out of scope for both core and the React integration, like gets the content from the database, save it back to it. There's an option that UCP uses, but not necessarily, it's not mandatory to use, that once you open the editor, that there's a lock on the PubSuite fragment. So stuff like that should be and are handled by the PubSuite integration. So the structure that you end up with is a PubSuite component that's wrapping a React component, which is wrapping Wax. And then Wax, according to the configuration that has been passed into it and its packages, then handles everything accordingly. And yeah, I mean, the last part would be configuration. Like, for example, you want the editor to open in read-only mode. This is passed in from outside. Let's say according to the permissions that you have in your app, maybe you can't edit. So you have options like that that are passed into the editor from the outside. Yeah, and one thing we've been playing with lately is layouts. So ideally, as I said earlier, because you have all this flexibility, you shouldn't be stuck with a specific UI. So by layout, I mean literally how things are put in the page. So this is the default layout, which has the editing surface in the middle, and then the toolbar on the top, and then another set of tools on the left, and so on. But we should provide like more layers. We have for XPub, which is another project by Coko, a bare layout, because all we wanted was just the text. So it's essentially just with a single prop, you change this and you say this is read only and the layout is bare, and you only get the editing surface in read only mode, no toolbars, no nothing around it. So this will be extended both by our layouts that we built, which would be included with WAX. So, for example, you should have a default layout, but we're going to make this easily overridden so that someone could make an editor with WAX that is, could look like a completely different thing. Okay, so that was the intro. So here we have some text in the middle, and on the left here you can see a set of tools. These are tools that apply to a whole block, and by block we mean something like a paragraph. So if you choose subtitle here, you can see that it turns it into a specific subtitle. So subtitle is a package for WAX. It could be included, but it could be removed. And you can have something like an epigraph, which is a blog, style like a blog quote, and epigraph poetry looks exactly the same, but it's marked differently in the data underneath. It could be a source note, a heading, or a smaller heading, general text, which is just simple text, with general text continued. So one of the things that you see here is that there's a number of rules that concern indentation. So they tell a specific package when it should be indented or not. So if there's an empty paragraph right above a paragraph, then you can see that it's not indented. If I delete this, now it's indented. But not all rules could be automated, because sometimes there's just no way to know apart from a human. So you can have a general text continued that just forces the text to not be indented. And then you can also have lists, like this could be a numbered list. This could be an unnumbered list, which is essentially a list with no style on the left, or a bulleted list, which is with a bullet style on the left. And you can have a dialogue, which is a QA kind of continuous dialogue. Essentially a list, but as you're writing, you can just keep on giving the text, and every time you press enter, it swaps Q for A. Of course, if you make a change, you can undo it, you can redo it, you can save, and you can save it also with a shortcut with Control-S. You can add italics, subscript, superscript. You can also select, let's remove that. You can also apply some styles to multiple paragraphs, which is something that for some reason wasn't given by default by Substance, but we thought it was expected behavior. So if I choose these two paragraphs and then mark them as a subtitle, both of them are made a subtitle. Of course, this only applies to text. So an image, and you can see a very beautiful developer here, Chris, who's been worked on WAX. So if I choose text, but the text between it includes an image, and I say subtitle, then the image is obviously ignored. You can add a link. So you can type in the link that you want in here, and this will be a link. And you can add a note. So let's add a couple of notes before I... Thanks. So you can see here that we have this small icon that says a node exists here, and a second icon that says a node exists here. In the other place, these were automatically numbered. Now, an important thing here is that all the information that concerns the node, and this icon here is, we use the term callout. All the information exists in the callout. So your data is the text. So the callout itself is just a node HTML element, which is a custom HTML element. And this, when we would be exporting to generic HTML element to fulfill the goal of genericness that we talked about earlier, that would be transformed into actual HTML, like a span with an ID type of node. But the important part is that all the text is, like, this part exists as far as data is concerned within the callout in there. What that lets us do is that we have this pane down here, and we can say, as you're choosing, you can see that the active one gets marked, but we can say that this pane here is just for displaying the nodes. So you could potentially remove this pane that says nodes and displays them, which is a package, and replace it with another package because you want the nodes displayed differently. But you could still use the package that uses the callout without having it bound to this. Now, if you see, I can also add a comment. Now I'm an admin. My username is admin, so it also works with a shortcut. And the same applies here. So you have a comment, and this gets marked as a comment. This wraps all this text with an HTML comment annotation. This annotation will contain all the data that it needs. So if you have a whole dialog here on the right, this will contain everything in there. And this pane on the right that displays the comment is just for displaying those comments. So this can be easily swapped while you could still use the comment annotation, just like with nodes. Then we also have, let's go down here. We also have special characters, which you can see, you can add in there, or you can keep it open because you want to put in a few of them. They also work inside the notes. One of the important things that we'll do in the very near future is making this configurable, because each use case needs a different set of characters. And also you can track changes. So if I have the correct permissions, then I can click on this button that says record changes. This is persistent in the data. So I'm logged in as, say, in Editoria, they have the highest permission is being a production editor. So if I'm a production editor, I can say, okay, from now on, I want everyone else, any change that anyone else makes to be tracked. So you can say record changes. And now if I start writing, you can see that this is marked as an addition. If I try to delete something, it marks it as a deletion, but it doesn't delete it yet from the data. This also applies in here. So you can track changes to the nodes. And again, if you have the permissions, you can say, okay, I accept this addition. So it actually inserts the text as it is. Or you can reject it and it just deletes it. And the same goes like for deletions. If you have deleted, if you've suggested that this text should be deleted, I accept that and it deletes it. Otherwise, you can say that you reject it and the text stays. Now, if there's a lot of people working on some text, this can be a bit jarring to have all these little UI elements with blue text and strike through. So it can be a bit hard to understand what you make some suggestions, but you want to have some way of saying what will my text look like if all of my suggested changes are accepted. So here you have this button that just hides the track changes. This does not really affect the data, but it just uses CSS to just show you what it would look like. So you can still write here, and this would be tracked underneath properly, but it's for the convenience of the user to not have this in the way if they want to make some changes that are, substantial. Yeah, and I think this is the main part. I mean, for the future, the main thing for us, for the editor, would be to make it as configurable as possible. And there's a lot of work to be done for that. But I mentioned layouts earlier. You should be able to just say, hey, I want an editor that only has heading 1, 2, bold, and images, and not loads, track changes, and extracts, and stuff like that. These things should be done without needing to tamper the actual code of Wax itself. So it's just a configuration options. And there are a few already, but this will be extended considerably in the near and short and mid-term future. And there's extra pieces of functionality that, like I said earlier, maybe you want to lock the document when someone is opening it for other users, so that other users can't edit at the same time. Maybe you don't. These are just options. And yeah, once we reach a first super stable release, then another important part would be documentation, because how would someone know all these different configuration options that will be built in, and they shouldn't need to find this video. So yeah, and how do you make a layout, stuff like that. Yeah, I think this is it. I don't know if the other devs that have worked on this partially or
I think
or a lot.
Yeah, I think you did a very good overview of Wax. I think and I'm a bit biased here, but I think it's commendable that you spent the effort to encapsulate the various levels of integration. So Wax core and then React integration and PubSuite integration. I imagine that wasn't easy, but it actually makes the editor very reusable in the maximum amount of environments. So I think that's a very nice step you did. An extra step that wouldn't be necessary. Nice. I think we have some time for a few questions, if there are any. Giuliano, go for it.
Yeah, thanks.
Hello.
Really impressive editor. When do you have a timeline for a stable release?
So one of the things now is that the focus is to get editorials enough into production, and that will mean definitely a degree of stability for the editor, obviously. But there's a few things that need to be figured out first for how do you make things configurable. And this can get complex if you start thinking of all the different use cases that someone might want. So as it stands now, the editor that you saw is quite stable. But what you see compared to what we have in mind for stable is a very different thing. So I'd say, yeah, like beginning of next year probably.
Okay, like Q1.
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So once we get editorial into production, all the focus for approximately 3 or 4 devs goes into this.
And you would expect at that point, others could take the editor and start playing with the configuration and add in packages and so on, kind of tailor it to their own use.
Yeah.
Do you have any offline functionality? Is there any way to add something like service workers or anything that would allow the editor to continue working, saving changes, and so on while offline?
Not right now, but we've discussed it in the past, so it's one of the things that we will build. But there is no specific timeline for this. It depends on if someone wants to use it and it's very important for them, then we can maybe reprioritize. But apart from discussions, we haven't done any actual work on this.
Okay, so just 2 very quick follow-up questions. One, is reference handling anywhere in your roadmap? And because I would expect it would be handled in a similar way to callouts, or at least one possibility. And the other one is, what is your minimum browser requirements for this?
Okay, so the minimum browser requirements is just like for now, because it's just been in development. It's been latest Chrome, but we'll figure out like a more official version of that. But for the references, I'm guessing you're referring to papers.
Yeah.
So these are certain nodes and callouts, but they have their own gotchas. Like that, you have to have specific formatting for what you can do in it.
Correct.
It shouldn't get automatically numbered, and it's not that hard to build the functionality for that. It's hard to come up with a good UI for this without making a complete mess of a div somewhere. But since we're also building systems for journals, I think it's definitely in the near future, like a package for bibliography. But yeah.
If I can just comment on that just briefly. So there's also a potential for some reuse from what Substance is doing in the texture editor. These are both editors based on Substance. So when Substance comes up with a way to deal with references in texture, and I think that's actively being worked on, that UI and that solution could more easily be ported into Wax than another editor. So there's some cross benefit there.
That's great. I remember seeing some of the early prototypes on Substance's handling of references, and that's kind of where my question was coming from. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
In essence, Wax packages are Substance packages. There are some extra things, but if you just throw something in there, if you're sure that it works on the same version of Substance and there's no breaking API change, it should just work.
Cool.
Good to know. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right, Andrew, go for it. You're muted.
So I don't have a. It's not exactly a question, but the big use case for us would be mathematics. So I'm just wondering what mathematics is in the roadmap.
So we don't have any work on this, but Stencila is also using Substance, which is another project, and they have a math package for it. So this should also be reusable in Wax.
So maybe the next show and tell will be Scintilla or something.
Yeah, it's not a Coko project per se, but it's affiliated. But yeah,
yeah,
definitely could be a suggestion.
I'm sure if we ask Nokomi, who is the founder of Tinsilla, to do a show and tell, he'd be happy to. But we'll see if there's any other Coko projects that would come before that. But we can reach out to him. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Andrew.
And we can also reach out to him for integrating his work on math integration into logs.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Any other questions? Nobody's raising their hand. All right. I think that means that this concludes our first show and tell. I think Yannis did a good job. And this will be posted on, we don't know yet, but it will be posted in some form as it was recorded through YouTube. It probably won't be posted on YouTube, but it will be posted with some open source format somewhere. And we'll figure out how to do that and how to deliver that to you for sharing or rewatching. All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming, and see you at the next show and tell.
Thank you very much.
Bye, folks.